Yesterday, you probably made a dozen decisions about money without even noticing. You checked your account. You hesitated before buying something. You told yourself, I can't afford that right now. Maybe you saw something you wanted and calculated whether you could justify it. Those weren't just thoughts. According to Neville Goddard, those were commands. And the part of you that receives those commands never questions them, never pushes back. It simply goes to work building a reality that matches what you believe about yourself. Here's the thing most people miss. Years spent trying to attract wealth, visualizing it, affirming it, asking for it, and still nothing changes. Neville said, you don't attract wealth, you assume it. There is a world of difference between those two things. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what Neville meant by assumption, why most people get it wrong, and the specific method he taught to actually make it work. Most people approach wealth the wrong way. The visualizations, the affirmations, the goals written down every morning, the vision boards, all of it done with complete sincerity. And then the waiting begins. Weeks pass, months pass. The circumstances stay exactly where they were, and at some point, a quiet conclusion forms. Maybe this just doesn't work for me. This is not because the law doesn't work, it's because most people are using it backwards. Neville was direct about this in At Your Command. He wrote, to be conscious of being poor and to pray to a God for riches is to be rewarded with that which you are conscious of being, which is poverty. Read that again. Praying for wealth from a consciousness of poverty doesn't produce wealth, it confirms poverty. Because the signal being sent isn't, I want money, the signal is, I am someone who doesn't have money. And that's exactly what comes back. The subconscious doesn't respond to desire, it responds to state. Here's the distinction that changes everything. There's a difference between thinking of something and thinking from something. Thinking of wealth is what most people do, looking at it from a distance, imagining it someday, wishing for it from where they currently stand. The consciousness stays exactly where it is, looking outward at a thing it wants but doesn't possess. Thinking from wealth is something else entirely. Neville described it in Awakened Imagination. We must move mentally from thinking of the end to thinking from the end. Not picturing the destination from the outside, actually inhabiting it, operating from within it as if it were already the only reality you know. The man who wants a promotion imagines what it would feel like to get promoted. The man who has assumed the promotion thinks and acts from a place where that promotion is simply who he is. Those two men are having completely different inner experiences, and according to Neville, completely different outer results will follow. Now, most people hearing this have an immediate objection. But I know I'm not wealthy. I can see my bank account. I can see my bills. How am I supposed to pretend that's not real? That's the right question, and Neville had a very specific answer. Neville wasn't asking you to pretend. He was asking you to understand how consciousness actually works, and more specifically, what the outer world actually is. He wrote in The Power of Awareness, man's chief delusion is his conviction that there are causes other than his own state of consciousness. All that befalls a man, all that is done by him, all that comes from him, happens as a result of his state of consciousness. This is the foundation of everything Neville taught. Your state of consciousness is the cause. Everything else is the effect. Not your actions, not your connections, not your timing, your education, or your luck, your state. And here's what that means practically. The outer world you're living in right now, your bank account, your income, your financial circumstances, is not your current reality. It is the printout of a previous state. It's already history. It reflects who you were in consciousness, not who you are now. You are looking at yesterday's output and calling it today's truth. The circumstances you see right now are not evidence of what is possible. They are evidence of what was believed. And belief can change. Consciousness can change. The outer world has no choice but to follow. Neville put it plainly. Signs follow. They do not precede. The money follows the state doesn't follow the money. This completely inverts the way most people think about change. Most people say, when I have the money, then I'll feel wealthy. Neville says the feeling of wealth must come first, always. The money is just the outer confirmation of something that already happened on the inside. Now here is where assumption enters. Neville used a very specific word deliberately, not visualization, not affirmation, assumption. An assumption is something you treat as already settled. You don't argue for it, you don't prove it, you simply inhabit it. He wrote in At Your Command, "It is impossible for the poor man to find wealth in this world, no matter how he is surrounded with it, until he first claims himself to be wealthy. For signs follow, they do not precede." Think about what that means. Standing in the middle of a room full of opportunity and still not receiving any of it, because consciousness hasn't claimed it yet. The opportunity is real, but the state hasn't matched it. The claim isn't verbal, it's not a statement made with the lips. Neville was clear that consciousness is where the claiming happens. You claim wealth by inhabiting that state internally, not by announcing it. And he said something powerful about what makes this different from mere visualization. In The Power of Awareness, an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Notice the word false. He acknowledged it openly. The assumption might feel false at first. That is acceptable. What matters is whether you persist in it. Persistence is what transforms assumption into reality. So how do you actually do this? Neville's method has 4 clear steps, and most people skip the one that matters most. Step 1. Define the end. Not the process, not the steps to get there, the end. Neville was insistent about this in Awakened Imagination. There is no stopping the man who can think from the end. Nothing can stop him. He creates the means and grows his way out of limitation into ever greater and greater mansions of the Lord. The end is not, I want to make more money. The end is a specific state. It feels like something. It has texture. It has details. What does life look like when wealth is already yours? Not when it arrives, when it's simply the normal background of existence. Where do you wake up? What do you talk about with the people around you? What has changed in how others treat you? What has changed in how you see yourself? That specific scene, that specific feeling, is your end. Step 2. Move into the end, not toward it. This is the distinction that separates Neville from every other teacher. Not working toward a goal, inhabiting a state. In The Law and the Promise, he described this as living in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not imagining it from outside, living in it. The difference is the difference between watching a film about Paris and actually standing on a street in Paris, smelling the air, hearing the language all around you. One is observation, the other is immersion. Neville wanted immersion. Step 3. Persist. This is the step most people abandon. He wrote in The Power of Awareness, "Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled until your assumption has all the sensory vividness of reality." Until. Not once, not twice, until the assumption feels as natural as breathing. And the assumption of the feeling of the wish fulfilled makes the future dream a present fact. This doesn't happen in one session. It happens through repetition, through returning to the state, through refusing to leave it when circumstances seem to contradict it. In the corporate world, I watched this play out in a way I didn't have language for at the time. There was a mentor I spent years studying. Not the most talented person in the room, not the most connected, but something about him made rooms shift when he walked in. He never operated from want, never positioned himself as someone trying to get somewhere. He was simply already there. Everything came from that place. I thought it was confidence or experience. Looking back through Neville's teaching, I recognize it now as something else. He had assumed a state and persisted in it long enough that it had simply become who he was. The world around him confirmed it, constantly and without exception. What I noticed, studying him over those years, is that opportunities didn't find him by accident. People offered things to him that they didn't offer to others in the same room. Contracts came his way, relationships opened, not because he was chasing any of it, because of what he had settled into internally. The state radiated outward, and the world responded to the state. Step 4. Drop the how. Neville was explicit, in At Your Command. Do not speculate as to the how of this consciousness embodying itself, for no man is wise enough to know the how. The rational mind wants a plan, it wants steps, it wants to see the bridge before crossing it. But speculating about the how is a sign that the assumption hasn't fully been made. Real assumption is settled. When something is settled, the how becomes irrelevant. You simply know it will come. Now I want to show you why this works. Not as a spiritual concept, as a description of how consciousness actually functions. Neville put it in At Your Command. Get the consciousness first, and the thing is compelled to appear. Compelled, not might appear, not probably appear, compelled to appear. Here is the mechanism, as Neville described it. Your consciousness is constantly projecting. Right now, in this moment, a signal is radiating about who you are. That signal attracts, creates, and organizes the circumstances that confirm your identity. It doesn't matter what you want, it responds to what you are. Conscious of being someone who struggles with money, and the world arranges itself to confirm that. Not because the universe is against you, because that is simply how the mechanism operates. The signal goes out. The matching reality comes back. In The Power of Awareness, Neville described a man who assumed he had a wonderful business. He wrote, "You will observe that as long as you remain faithful to your assumption, so long will your attention be confronted with images clearly related to that assumption. Friends congratulate you, tell you how lucky you are. Others are envious and critical. From there, your attention goes to larger offices, bigger bank balances, and many other similarly related events. Persistence in this assumption will result in actually experiencing, in fact, that which you assumed." Notice the sequence. First, the assumption, then the internal experience of confirmation, then the physical manifestation. The assumption doesn't wait for proof, it generates it. Neville illustrated this in The Law and the Promise through a real story. A doctor and his wife had been dreaming about building an apartment complex for 15 years. No money for it, but they began to live in the assumption that it was already built. Imaginary walks through the finished building, friends congratulating them on it. And the key shift Neville described in their thinking: if we were living in the end, we would not be looking for a contractor. When the state is truly assumed, you stop searching for the how. The how is already implied by the end, and the bridge of circumstances builds itself without your interference. At Your Command closes with, "Decree the unseen to appear, and it shall appear. For all things are compelled to respond to the voice of God, your awareness of being." Your awareness, your decree, your assumption. The outer world is not the cause. It has never been the cause. 3 mistakes I see constantly, and I made all of them before I understood what Neville was actually teaching. Mistake 1. Confusing feeling with state. People try to feel excited about money, generate the rush of abundance through sheer effort. It feels good for a few minutes and then it collapses. That's not what Neville was pointing to. Think about your name. Right now you know it. No effort required. No reminding yourself. It's simply your state, settled. That's the quality of assumption Neville meant. In At Your Command, the very moment my claim is established to the point of conviction, that moment I begin to draw unto myself the evidence of my claim. Conviction, not enthusiasm, not excitement, a quiet, settled knowing that needs no maintenance. Mistake 2, assuming the getting instead of the having. Most people imagine the moment of receiving, the check arriving, the deal closing, the notification that the bank balance changed. But that's not the end. That's still the bridge. The end is what life looks like after the money is already normal, already unremarkable, already simply the backdrop of your existence. Neville pointed to this in Awakened Imagination. In his imagination he dwells in the end, confident that he shall dwell there in the flesh also. Dwell. To live in a place, to be at home there, not to visit briefly and come back. When truly dwelling in the end, wealth isn't exciting anymore. It's simply life. That's the state. Mistake 3, testing the assumption. Almost everyone does this. A few days into the practice, and attention goes back to circumstances to see if anything has changed. Nothing has, so the conclusion is that it isn't working, and the assumption gets abandoned. Neville wrote in At Your Command, "Do not speculate as to the how of this consciousness embodying itself, for no man is wise enough to know the how." Checking is speculating. Monitoring is speculating. Every time you look at circumstances to evaluate whether the assumption is working, you've stepped outside the state. And from At Your Command, just a little while and the things desired, will come. But without faith, it is impossible to realize anything. The assumption requires you to stop auditing reality. You commit to the state before the evidence arrives. That's the nature of faith. That's the nature of assumption. Here's what to take from this video. Wealth is not something you attract, it's something you assume. Most people spend years searching for the right technique, the right affirmation, the right frequency. Neville taught something far simpler and far more demanding. Stop looking for wealth from outside the state. Step inside it, inhabit it, and persist there until the outer world has no choice but to confirm what you have already become in consciousness. Define the end clearly. Move into that state rather than reaching toward it. Persist until the assumption carries the weight of something already done, and release the need to know how it will arrive. Neville closed At Your Command with, "Decree the unseen to appear, and it shall appear. For all things are compelled to respond to the voice of God, your awareness of being." Your awareness is the voice, your assumption is the decree. Start there. If this teaching resonated with you, subscribe. This channel goes through Neville's work methodically, stripping away the complexity and showing exactly how to apply it. Leave a comment with any specific teaching you want covered next. Everyone gets read. See you in the next video.